Today I'm here to talk about the science fiction fantasy books I've been reading over the last few weeks. And if you followed my last SFF wrap-up, you know that I was really struggling with these genres a few weeks ago. I was just in a bit of a reading slump. I had a lot going on with work and with life, and my reading was suffering accordingly. And so I'm happy to say that I'm back with some better recommendations, and that's always the case. So I appreciate those of you who stick around with those weeks where I don't have the strongest book recommendations. It means I come back even stronger when I have a new fresh pair of eyes, when I'm feeling rejuvenated about the books I'm reading, and I have some great books to recommend to you all, so let's get started. First, let's start with science fiction, beginning with one of the books that pulled me out of that reading slump. And so the first book I want to talk about is Saint Elspeth by Wick, Welker, and this is a book that I received from the author for review. I've read and reviewed their other books and very excited for this one. I actually got the opportunity to do the cover reveal and reveal as well the synopsis for the book in a previous video, and now I've finally gotten to read it. This is a piece of post-apocalyptic fiction that's set in a future where these alien spheres have come and they've landed on the Earth. And of course there is the speculation, the questioning of why are they here? Are they here to invade? What is their purpose? And specifically, this story follows the reaction to what happens when you have all of these nations reacting in fear. And so what actually comes about is less so, at least at the beginning, about the alien spheres and more so about the reaction of these nations as they go about going into nuclear mode and creating war and fighting and bringing about the end of the world as we know it. The story specifically takes place about 20 years afterwards. We follow this doctor named Elspeth, hence the title, and she works in the field trying to do her best. She has to go beyond her training and try to help people as best she can and work within the situation she is left in. You find out within the story, it's on the synopsis, that her spouse and child have died. She has this great grief and is trying to deal and work through that and perhaps find meaning in her work. And then within the story, you end up following her as she goes on this trek, this journey. And I'm going to leave the synopsis there. This is a book I was really interested in checking out because I've loved the author's previous work. Again, I got to do the cover reveal for this, but I will admit, before actually getting to read the book, I was a little bit nervous to pick it up just because I was going in with expectations given the fact that I love their other work, and also the fact that first, I don't normally love a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction. It's not my favorite and has become less so a favorite over the last few years. Over the pandemic, it's just not an area or focus I enjoy reading about. And then there was also the second fact that in doing the cover reveal, I got to share the synopsis, and there was a lot going on in that. And I'm someone who really likes a clean, straightforward narrative. I really like a book that is tightly written, and the synopsis, the setup for this book is ambitious. There's a lot going on. There's these alien spheres, there's this broken world, there's this individual going on this journey, and there's so much more to the story. And often, if you watch my videos, you'll know that my criticism of these kind of books is that they're messy, the narrative is all over the place, and I could see the criticisms coming. When I read that synopsis, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm not gonna like this book. I'm so worried. And I did continue to accept this book for review. And I'll be honest, it worked. It worked in a way that I don't see other books trying to do so much normally does. There are places, yes, where I would tighten up the narrative in certain spots where there's just, again, so much happening. But it fit together in a way that I didn't expect it to. Again, authors who are really ambitious either succeed, which I feel is the case here, or they fail, which is always disappointing. For me, what makes this book work is the character, specifically Saint Elspeth is just such a relatable, likable woman. You really feel for her through her grief, the loss of her family, and there's a lot of emotional weight to this book. I do want to give content warnings for those that are involved in pregnancy and labor and in those early years of childhood. There is a lot of potential harm to young children and so forth that is just surrounding this book. I don't really want to get into it too much, but just know that those trigger warnings are there. I can explore more in the comments if you want to ask questions. But this book was emotionally tough to read. It brought me back to my own pregnancy in a way that made me uncomfortable, but I don't mean that as a criticism. I have said it before in videos. I like books that make me feel something. Often I feel very numb when I read. I will enjoy or appreciate the story, but for me to actually feel an emotional gut punch, to feel uncomfortable and bothered and have those dark feelings come out, is a positive for me. I love when a book can really push me to feel something. Again, I'm a black-hearted reader, and so when a book can actually push me and make me emotional, it catches my attention, and that is exactly what happened with this book. It has a really strong start, a really likable character at the center of the story, and overall I was here for the adventure. I am also someone who doesn't always enjoy traveling stories, which again typically tie into post-apocalyptic events. It's the reason I haven't read books like The Stand and The Road, is there's a lot of walking in those books. But this one worked for me. It actually reminded me a lot of The Last of Us, of course, the TV show that was based off the video game. And so if you love that kind of narrative where again it's set in this post-apocalyptic world, but it's really about the characters and relationships at its core, this book will likely appeal to you as well. And then there is the potential science fiction element to the story because again, post-apocalyptic can often lean more into horror, but you have the alien setup to this work. And I really enjoyed within this book questioning how important that was going to be, if it was merely set up or would be woven into the story more so. Personally, I feel like that would be giving way too much to hint as to how much importance it will or will not play, so I'll leave it there and let you experience it for yourself. So if you can tell, I really overall enjoyed this one. I thought it was a solid piece of post-apocalyptic fiction. Again, writing in a genre I don't like, and actually having me like it says a lot about the quality of the book, the writing, the characters. I really enjoyed this one, and I think you're going to see it in an upcoming video because I gotta start talking about favorites of the year, and this one might make the list. Then I read some backlist science fiction, starting with One Way by J.S. Morden. And this is a sci-fi thriller that is set in a future where they're going off to colonize Mars. However, because of course it's very dangerous and deadly, they send off the less desirable people on Earth. So specifically, they give people who are incarcerated, people who are in prison, the chance to get out of prison, going on this mission, hence the title One Way, the suggestion that they'll never come back and may die in the process of this mission. But because they are stuck in prison for life, it seems like a better job. So within the story, you have some very unlikable characters who have done some pretty nasty stuff, and it's an interesting setup for a story. There is a mystery element to this, and so you find the characters trying to puzzle out who is behind things when strange things start to happen. It seems to be some sabotage, etc. I like this one. It wasn't the most memorable story, and despite the main characters being again these kind of unlikable prison folks, for lack of a better word, I didn't find them to have really fleshed out personalities. They felt more like stereotypes. It was a fine read, an enjoyable read, a good one, but you can tell it wasn't a favorite. Next is A Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And this is a bit of a classic, one I've been wanting to read for quite a while. It follows a man who is a war veteran, and through circumstances he ends up on Mars. He discovers the indigenous Martians there, and within their tribes or groups, there is this woman who they treat as their princess, who happens to look a lot more like a human, and he is then attracted to her and wants to go and find her, save her, etc. This is an adventure story that to me makes the most sense when you understand this is the same author who wrote Tarzan. Now, I actually have not read Tarzan, but I think like most people, I'm very familiar with the basics of the story because of all the media tie-ins. I watched the Disney movie, I love Phil Collins. Anyway, getting back on track. So with the story, basically it reads in my mind like Tarzan on Mars. So given the age of this book, I do want to acknowledge the fact that there are certainly problematic elements to the story. The characters are described as savages and so forth in a way that is just very colonial in terms of thinking. And so I definitely acknowledge that you have to go into the story recognizing the fallacies of it. And I will be honest that if this book had been written today, I would definitely view it with a lot harsher criticism. But I do believe that there's something to be considered of things being of their time. It's a interesting discussion and examination of what different beliefs were held at that point in time. I like to think that I can see it with a modern lens while still separating myself from some of the parts of the story that I feel to be very bothersome. Within the story itself, it's just this adventure story. It's exciting. It is fast paced. It's easy to fly through. It's a very short story. I had just a really good time with it. I think I almost liked, again, the age of the story and the way that it felt very much, again, of its time. And so it almost had that campy feeling to it. Reading it today, now that we have a lot more understanding about what the surface of Mars looks like, I do think that this book is, again, very much a timepiece because it doesn't really reference the Mars as we know it, but it just happens to be, again, an adventure story set in a far-flung planet. And it was enjoyable. It was kind of what I expected and fulfilled what I was looking for at the time. So in a very slumpy reading month, it was an enjoyable one to check out. And if we want to talk about books that got me out of this reading slump, I have to talk about Deathstalker Rebellion by Simon Green. And this is the second book in the series that starts with Deathstalker, which I talked about a while back, maybe last year. And so this story follows an individual named Owen, and it is very much set in a world inspired by something that feels like Star Wars. I think there is clear inspiration there. I don't think the author is really trying to hide it. And it's a story that definitely has those sci-fancy elements to it. Without giving away too much of the plot of the first book, this one deals, as you can probably guess from the title, with a rebellion. So it definitely has that feel of the rebellion from the original Star Wars trilogy. And I really like this story because it is an amazing balance between being a really fun, entertaining plot. Again, think about watching a Star Wars movie. It has that same similar feel, but I don't want to discount this book and sell it short, because despite having a kind of cheesy, fun setup to it, there is a lot of depth to the story. There's a lot of good conversations about how to form a rebellion. A lot of the conversations about how certain groups will come together because they have more influence if they rebel as a group. However, that doesn't actually mean that they like each other. It doesn't actually mean that they agree with each other, that they respect each other. They just know that they're going to be stronger together. But there's some really good conversations around the prejudice that can exist within a rebellion, that they aren't actually as united of force as they appear to be. Overall, I just enjoyed this book. It just felt fun and rompy, but again, had that depth that I was looking for, that sophistication and thoughtfulness that really round out the story. Do I think this is the best science fiction series ever written? No, but I'm going to tell you that at the time of recording this, I've already started the third book because I'm obsessed. I just can't get enough. And this series could likely end up on next year's favorites because it's a backlist series that I'm getting really excited about. Now let's switch over to fantasy, starting with Warrior of the Wind. This is the second book in the series that starts with Son of the Storm. That was one of my favorite fantasy books when it was first published. I'm going to be talking about the second book without spoiling it. So the basic setup for the first book is an African-inspired fantasy story that follows a multitude of different characters, but specifically we follow one individual who discovers that some magic that is not supposed to exist actually does. I'm a huge sucker for stories that involve forbidden magic being rediscovered into the world. So I really like this one. It had some really interesting cultural aspects dealing with different cultural divides, racism between groups, and a lot of interesting woven magic into the story. You also have a perspective of a woman that I found to be very compelling because she is very morally gray, let's say. And so overall, I just really enjoyed the first book. I thought it was a strong debut and I'd be really looking forward to continuing on. I like this one. It's a good story. It's a good world to be in, but I will admit that this one had a lot less action, and some of the focus in terms of the characters and plots were just not in the places that I wanted them to be. I am 100% still going to continue on with the series. I think it has a lot of potential, but assuming this is going to be a trilogy, this book kind of felt like middle book syndrome. I just don't feel like it did a lot to enhance the plot, to enhance the story in a way that I would have expected to. I still really recommend the first book. I think it's great, and depending on my feelings about the book that comes after this one, I'll let you know how I feel about the series overall. This one was just a weaker entry, but still good. It's better than a lot of the fantasy I read. I enjoyed this one, but it left me disappointed based off my expectations after finishing the first. Next, I read 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. This is the first book in the Inheritance trilogy. If you follow my channel, you'll know that I'm a huge fan of the Broken Earth trilogy, and so I've been meaning to read more of this author's work for quite a while. And after a couple of false starts with a few of their other books, I decided to go with this one, and I'm really glad I did. So far, this first book, at least, and again, I haven't read all the books in the trilogy, definitely reminds me of what I love about the Broken Earth trilogy. I should start to say that this follows a young woman who is an outcast. Her mother dies, and she ends up finding out that she is actually the heiress to the king, and then is pulled into that life. And what I love about this one is that it draws on a lot of the themes and ideas that I love so much in the Broken Earth trilogy. There's a lot of conversation surrounding oppression, and it definitely offers a gritty worldview. There is, again, a lot of talk of the abuses that you see in certain situations where someone is in the place they are, and that is definitely tied within the story. There's also a theme that I love in this author's work where they explore difficult relationships with mothers, which is, again, just a topic and theme that I cannot read enough of. I find it fascinating when it's well done, and is very much the case here. If you're familiar with N.K. Jemisin's writing, you'll see what you expect here. Again, it's rich, it's lush, it's very just distinct. There's something about her writing where I can almost recognize it anywhere. Not everyone loves it. You kind of just have to try it for yourself. I can't quite figure out how to describe it on camera in a way that makes sense. But if you like this author's work, if you like their themes and ideas, I definitely see the appeal. I don't expect this trilogy to surpass my enjoyment of her first one that I read, Broken Earth, but this one is definitely coming in at a strong second, and I'm excited to read more of this trilogy, more of their work, and I'll report back once I've read the later books. So that's it for this video here. Despite a few misses, overall I feel like this video had some good hits. So of the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And please let me know, what do you do when you're in a reading slump? What is your recommendation to get out of it? For me, it's basically just finding really good books, and then my mood just moves along. Sometimes I watch TV, and one way or another I always come out the other side, which is a great feeling. I'm feeling really excited and rejuvenated about my reading again, and so hopefully if you want to stick around and subscribe, I'll have more great books to talk about soon. If you want to hit that little notification bell, I appreciate that too. You can give me a thumbs up, you can drop a little comment, even if it's just a little emoji. Find something that represents the end of a reading slump. Let's find something triumphant, fireworks. Let's get creative. All right, talk to you again soon. Thanks, okay, bye.